If you're thinking about getting one of these awesome Anker SOLIX power stations and you don't know which one you should get, in this video I'm going to compare the Anker SOLIX C300 and the 300 DC, and I'm going to talk about how similar they are and more importantly what the differences are. So let's dig in. Hey everybody, it's Chris from FamilyGeekery, and today we're talking about the Anker SOLIX C300 line of power stations. We got the 300, and I've also seen it listed as the 300X over here, and then we've got the 300 DC. A lot of people may call this the 300 AC for obvious reasons. Now, missing from this comparison is the 200 DC, and we'll talk about that also, but for all intents and purposes, it's almost identical to the 300 DC, just a smaller capacity. So let's list out real quick some of the similarities between these two. They both have 288 watt hours of capacity. They both have a 300 watt output max, although we're going to talk about the differences obviously that the AC version has and that 300 watts output. They are both similar in design in the sense that they are a more vertical power station than some of the more traditional like lunchbox looking ones. They've both got a light, although one is a light bar in the front and one is a pop-up light, more like a camp light. They both have a solar input of 100 watts max with an XT60 connector here, and then we've got one underneath this door on the 300 AC model, and they've both got a DC plug, which is 12 volts 10 amps output. Now, in addition to those similarities, the DC outputs are very similar on the USB ports. On the AC model, we've got one USB-A versus the two USB-As on the DC model. The AC model has 3 USB-Cs, one is a low power, 2 are high power, and one of these is an input. And on the DC model, we've got a low power USB-C here, and then we've got 3 higher power ones, with all 3 being able to output and 2 of those being able to input. And that's important, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Both of these power stations can be controlled through the Anker app, which makes it great for setting up some of your preferences and controlling the thing while you're not standing right in front of it. And that's really the majority of the similarities. Now let's talk about some of the important differences, with the most obvious being the fact that this has an inverter built in, so you've got 3 AC outputs, whereas the DC model has no AC outputs natively. Now in my full review of the 300 DC, I did use an inverter plugged into the 12 volt port there, and I was able to output 80 to 100 watts through an inverter to AC. So you do have that capability if you need it, but if you need more than that power, or if you don't want to carry an extra inverter with you, then the AC model is the way to go. Not only does it have 3 ports, but it's capable of handling up to 300 watts continuous with a boost power output of about 600 watts. So that's one of the biggest differences. Speaking about big differences, I think we should address the size difference. There's a weight difference of about 3 pounds. This one is just over 9 pounds, and the smaller one is just over 6. So if ultra portability is required, then saving that 3 pounds and going with the DC model may be the way to go. And physical size differences between the two is about 1.5 inches in each direction. So the AC model is about 1.5 inches taller, 1.5 inches wider, and 1.5 inches deeper than the DC model. And the last very important difference between the two is going to be the AC input capability of the AC model. So this one comes with a cord that you can plug it right into your wall, and it will recharge up to 330 watts input. So you can recharge this thing in just about an hour or less to full capacity. Now the DC model does not have an AC input port, and it relies on the USB-Cs as the input. So that's why both of these ports here on the right are capable of up to 140 watts of input each. That gives you a combined input of 280 watts input, which is very close to the 330 that you can get from the AC cord. But the biggest difference is you're going to need chargers that can supply 140 watts each and cables that can supply 140 watts each. So my guess is Anker is either relying on you having high power chargers already, or they want you to purchase something like their desktop models. There's a 240 watt like this, and then there's a 250 watt model also, and that gives you plenty of USB-C's output to charge up this thing very rapidly. If you wanted to save a little bit of money, then you could find a couple gallium nitrate chargers. Anker makes some, Ugreen makes some, there's a bunch of different brands that make them, and they're not much bigger than this, and they give you 140 watts output. So if you bought 2 of those in the right cables, then you could use those to charge this up. But there's definitely a convenience for just one cable plugging this right into the wall and no adapters needed. So that's basically the differences in a nutshell. If I had to summarize it real quick, I'd say obviously the AC model has AC output and AC input, whereas the DC model has only DC output and only DC input. That's the easiest way to put it. Now, I said we'd talk about the 200 DC, and like I said, it's basically the same thing, just a little bit smaller with 192 watt-hours instead of 288 watt-hours. But besides that, it's very similar. Smaller, lighter, less capacity. If that's all you need, then save a couple bucks and get that one. But I don't believe the 200 DC has 2 ports for charging in, so if you want the speed of charging, then I would go with the 300 DC in almost every case. So I think that's going to wrap it up for this video. If you have any questions about any of this stuff, just go ahead and drop them down in the comments below. I'll be happy to answer them. Go ahead and check out the rest of the channel. I've got full reviews on both of these models available on the channel. Go ahead and check those out and then subscribe. I've got more reviews on these power stations and accessories coming up soon, so go ahead and keep an eye out for those. But that's going to wrap it up for this one. I appreciate you as always for watching, and until next time, peace out and geek out.